Hello, and welcome again. This channel is called Aldsidu, Aldsidu meaning old customs or old ways. And today I'm going to be doing a defense of historical old ways heathenry and really talking about the reconstruction of old ways heathenry, the main 4 points that we're trying to do by reconstructing the old ways heathenry. Now, this is going to be a little weird to say. This video is only going to have 5 slides. Normally, I'm all about slides. I'm not about showing my face. Lots of crazy people out there joining pagan movements. And I'm not saying that there's not some good, insane people, because there's a lot of really good, insane, and smart and wise people joining pagan movements and heathen movements today. But unfortunately, there's also a lot of crazies out there. So twofold, I'm trying to, one, give some protection to myself, and two, as other people, YouTubers, make big names for themselves, I'm all about the promotion of historical heathenry and not promotion of myself. So I get asked this question all the time, and I've heard this comment over and over again for 21 years. We do not do the old ways anymore, and we should not. When is the last time you sacrificed a human that you captured in battle? And are you saying we have to go back and live in mud huts too? I hear these arguments, these two in particular, all the time, and I get frustrated with both of them because these arguments are really poor arguments and they're not well thought through. There's many reasons why these are wrong. Our heathen ancestors wore modern clothes for their time period. So if electricity existed back when heathenry was a historical religion, heathens would have used electricity and they still would have done Blot and Sumble and done their old ways. So to say that heathens did not live in their own modern times and shunned any form of advancement when Vikings are famous, I'm using the term Viking intentionally here, they're famous for building ships and whatnot. So if they're famous for creating technology, it's proof that heathen peoples did accept technology, but they still called their religion the old ways. And I'll get back to that. And I also get frustrated with this because old gods, new ways people, if you're going to argue that we shouldn't do the old ways because we no longer do human sacrifice, then my next argument back at you is, why do you then venerate gods who accepted human sacrifice if you have such a problem with it? Maybe you shouldn't venerate these gods at all. They attack the old ways, but they don't attack the gods who accepted these old ways. And thirdly, a modern mind. Most of the world is secular now, and I hate to admit this, but America was founded as a Christian country. Religious outcasts from Europe coming here to gain their Christian religious freedom. Lots of religious sects came over here for Christian religious freedom, not religious freedom per se. But if you get what I'm saying, America's a Christian country, technically. But only 22% of America now attends church once a month. That's a record low, and the world is getting more secular and more secular and more secular. And when people make this argument that we should not follow the old ways, we should make up things and just make up new traditions because human sacrifice and other things were wrong, I would argue very quickly back at them, well, why don't you just reject religion altogether? Because religion is no longer a part of mainstream thought in our modern world. So to argue that we aren't going to do the old ways just because heathens don't do sacrifice anymore is not a very good argument. And to argue that, well, we don't live in mud huts anymore, so we're not going to do the old ways, which implies that our ancestors didn't live in a modern world when they lived in their times. Their world back then was modern for them. So it's a stupid argument, very stupid. And the other thing that I want to very much make clear, I'm even going to go to the next slide now. Times change, I get that. But let's just talk about human sacrifice for a moment. We have TV shows like Vikings, for example, that show Viking people sacrificing their own people to their gods. And I haven't seen evidence for that in the historical sources. I mean, there is one saga where they decide to burn an earl alive because he was such a crappy earl and caused them plenty of death. But that's very rare in the sagas, extremely rare. And they didn't march him out and hang him on a tree to Odin like a typical human sacrifice was done. But I can make many historical quotes here, like Sidonius, and you know this channel is more about Old Saxon heathenry, but we cover all the Norse and Scandinavian Germanic tribes as well. Um, and here Sidonius, when he talked about the Saxons in his 9 books of letters, 489 A.D., he says, when the Saxons prepare to set out from their homeland, their custom dictates that they sacrifice 1/10 of their prisoners. The victims are chosen by lot and killed by water or crucifixion. Now, I don't believe that crucifixion was really meant. Only the Romans crucified people. Crucifixion was something that had to be explained in the Old Saxon Heliand, a poem written in the 9th century to convert the Saxons. So if they had to explain what crucifixion was to Saxon people in the 9th century, then the Saxons weren't doing it. Hanging foreigners caught in battle on trees to Woden, they certainly did. Woden is Odin. But they didn't sacrifice their own people. I don't see any evidence of that. I just don't. And as a matter of fact, there's plenty of historical sources that imply otherwise. And if we were to go back in time, I mean, we have the Geneva Convention today, and there's a scene in a movie that I've seen recently, with Bruce Willis, him stuck in a Nazi prisoner camp, and one of the Nazi commanders there, he doesn't know what the Geneva Convention is. I'm sure he does really know, but he doesn't care about it. When you're in war, it's either kill or be killed, and war isn't a nice thing. It's not a pretty thing. War is war. War is to kill your enemy before your enemy kills you. And you have to realize that back in the day, if you got prisoners of war, it made more sense to sacrifice them to the gods than to let them go and face them on the battlefield again. Modern ideals of war are often thrown out when battle actually happens. And, a lot of people in my family history have been in battles. I have not. So, I can't say that I'm a soldier by experience, but I'm smart enough to look back and think about it. Am I going to kill someone, or I'm going to let them kill me in war? I mean, the answer is I'm going to kill them. It's very simple. And am I going to it's one thing to do a prisoner transfer for some of your own back, but Germanic tribes didn't really do that. Yes, they exchanged hostages here or there, but that was typically before battle or after battle to ensure a peace treaty. Prisoners caught in war, the winning side typically just killed them, and that's how it was. But back to the point, what's the difference between Old Ways and New Ways Heathenry? What are we trying to reconstruct? Well, first of all, I would say historical heathenry is about practice. That's orthopraxy. Orthopraxy is practice, whereas orthodoxy is about belief. So to be orthodox means we have to have the right belief. So Christian orthodoxy is believing that Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior, and therefore you are saved from your sins and get eternal salvation. That is an example of Christian orthodoxy. So orthodoxy is about belief, but orthopraxy is about how you practice heathenry. And believe it or not, the historical words that heathens used historically to describe their faith were words like Aldsidu, meaning old customs. Well, that's the word that we have in Old Saxon poetry where the Old Saxons are describing their own faith. The other words we have is fourfold or fourfold. These are typically the Scandinavian, the Danish, the Norwegian. The word Norse really means Norwegian, Swedish, etc., Icelandic. And we also have words like thou and thu, depending if you're Old English or, again, Scandinavian. Scandinavian languages are Germanic languages. These are all related. We also have the word wissa, meaning practices. You can also translate those as traditions. But if I were to say in Old Saxon, landwitha, that would mean customs of the people of this land. So, if I were to discuss foreign religious beliefs, I'd say land customs. And when monks in heathen times, when the church was trying to convert the heathens, when monks actually didn't write in Latin and they wrote letters and documents in Old Saxon, for example, they would call the Old Saxon religion heathen wissa, which means heathen practices or heathen traditions. So my point is the words in historical heathenry imply that heathenry was about practice, and the emphasis in heathenry was practice. So that is really what historical heathenry in a nutshell was about. It was deed over creed. Creed meaning a listing of beliefs, and deed meaning, what holy days are we celebrating and what are we celebrating. Now, the word that is most often used for modern Germanic heathenry is Asatru. A lot of people say Asatru, and I've said Asatru many times, but the Aesir, Asatru, probably a better pronunciation. I'd have to ask how they pronounce it in Iceland today, but I'm assuming it's Asatru. And, Asatru is a modern word. We don't see it in historical languages. Sure, the word true is in all the historical Germanic languages. Aesir is certainly in the historical Germanic languages. So it's taking two historical words and smashing them together in one word. It was never a compound word historically. But I'm not attacking the title Asatru. My point is that the word Asatru today does mean true to the Aesir. And an Old Ways Heathen is going to say, to be true to the Aesir, people should approach the Aesir the way the Aesir were historically approached. And they're going to say that that's the right way because our ancestors who were heathens, our heathen ancestors had centuries of experience at venerating the ancestral gods. And to ignore their centuries of experience in their interaction with the gods, obviously they have tremendous wisdom, our ancestors, on how to approach the gods and how the gods wanted to be approached. It would be insane and the opposite of wisdom to ignore the wisdom that our ancestors left us, what historical writings survived about historical heathenry. And honestly, there's a lot of them. We have around 700 sources. We have 300 Old English poems, 21 Old Saxon poems. We have Norse sagas, Icelandic sagas, Eddas. I mean, there's a lot, and much more than the Bible. times more than the Bible. So, there is a lot of wisdom that survived of our ancestors. And sure, sometimes Christians wrote it down and we have to weed out the bias and use some critical thinking. That's fine. But, in the end, a historical Old Ways heathen is going to say, hey, this is how we approach the gods because this is how they were approached historically. And what's really weird about a lot of New Ways heathens to me, they will toast their ancestors in Sumble, their heathen ancestors of long ago, and say, I love their old ways, blah, blah, blah. But really, their modern worldview totally disagrees with 85% or more of the stuff that historical heathens believe. Because, historical heathenry, they were in a different world than we were today. Our mind is very modern. Their mind was modern for their day. But their historical worldview is very different from ours. So if they disagree with what our heathen ancestors taught and they're out to teach against what they taught, I don't understand. Because, when I read lots of New Ways Asatruar making posts on Facebook and Reddit and whatnot, I see that they clearly disagree with the heathen worldview shown in the Eddas and the Sagas. And yet they, for some reason, have this false belief that they agree with their heathen ancestors. It's very strange, and it's kind of disappointing. But, let me give some examples about some things. So let's take Ynglinga Saga chapter 8 from the year 1225. Okay, Odin established the same law in his land that had been enforced in Asaland, or Isaland. On winter day, or the first day of winter nights, there should be a bloat for a good year. In the middle of winter, or midwinter, or Yule, it's a bloat for a good crop. And the third bloat should be on summer day, a victory bloat. So the historical sources state that Yule is a bloat done midwinter for a good crop. But modern Aldsidu often teaches that Yule is called Mother Night. First of all, that's a misnomer because the historical sources say Mother's Night, and mothers with an apostrophe is in possessive. It's a night celebrating the ancestral mothers. Now, I'm not saying that Mother's Night was Yule because I don't believe so, but a lot of people study this passage in Bede and they claim that Mother's Night is Yule. That's problem number one. Problem number two, they call it Mother Night singular with no possessive apostrophe in the end. And they say that Yule is about the shortest night of the year and the sun's coming back. But the historical sources, and I can quote a lot more than just Ynglinga Saga chapter 8, but when you read the Norse sources, that Yule was not about the return of the sun whatsoever. There is nothing in Norse literature that implies that it is. And a lot of people say, well, Yule was on the solstice. I have a whole video to disprove this, but Yule was not on the solstice. It was on the full moon of Yule Manuther, which means Yule moon. It was on the full moon of Yule moon. And even the Chronicle of Thietmar Mersberg, which is the second quote, was said in 1000 AD, as I have heard odd stories concerning their ancient midwinter sacrifices, midwinter meaning midwinter or Yule, as I have heard odd stories concerning their midwinter sacrifices, I will not allow this custom to be ignored. The middle of that kingdom is called Lederin, or Lera, and in the region of Svalen, all the people gathered every 9 years in January. That's after we have celebrated the birth of our Lord. Now, December 25th was when Christmas was, but the Julian calendar also had December 25th on the solstice. So we have a number of historical sources. This isn't the only one. I can quote Hakon the Good, chapter 15, where as part of forced Christianization, he moved Yule to be from the full moon of Yule moon, or Hoknuot, the full moon of Yule moon, to be on the same night as Christmas. And that's why, Christmas is called Yule in Scandinavia today. And please keep in mind, Easter in Scandinavia today is not called Oster or Ostara. It's called Pascha. Or Pasch. These are the two words in modern Scandinavia, and that's the word Pesach in Hebrew or Pascha in Greek, meaning Passover. So, I can go on and on about that, but again, when we actually study and we reconstruct, the point is twofold. This is my most important slide of this video. What is the difference between Old Ways and New Ways Heathenry? What is the Reconstruction Model for Old Ways Heathens? It's fourfold. 1, when were the holy days and what were we celebrating? 2, how Blot was done historically. 3, how Sumble was done historically. And 4, other tribal viewpoints. So I'm on the first one now. Okay, let me be blunt. Christmas has been on December 25th since 336 AD. It will never change. Christmas is always going to be on December 25th. They will not change the date. It has been the same date for 17, 18 centuries. Christmas to Christianity is always about the birth of Christ. The meaning and the date of the holiday will never change. If heathenry survived until today, just like Christianity isn't going to change the date of Christmas or the meaning of Christmas, and it hasn't since it was established in 336 AD, if heathenry survived until today, the dating of Yule and the meaning of Yule would not change. Yule is not about the rebirth of the sun. Okay. Now, where does this misconception come from? Why was December 25th chosen? People say, they're stealing Yule. Everyone says that the church's holy days are a ripoff of their own historical heathenry. The only people that are actually right in that stupid claim is the Romans. Okay, the Romans aren't stupid, but everyone else is stupid. And I'm going to say that sincerely and as politely as I can. Okay, the reason why the church chose December 25th for Christmas was because it was a Roman church, and the pagans they were dealing with were Roman pagans celebrating Saturnalia and the cult of Mithras. And its major holiday was December 25th, which was the solstice. So the idea that the church picked the solstice for the birth of Christ, to say light's coming back into the world, was to make a deal with the Roman pagans to get involved in the church. It wasn't stealing Germanic pagan Yule. So these neo-pagan Asatru organizations that make this stupid claim need to shut up, because they're completely and totally wrong. Yule has nothing to do with the rebirth of the sun. The Eddas, the sagas, the historical sources make clear that Yule was not on the solstice, and it was not about the rebirth of the sun. Okay, Christianity is about the birth of the sun, both being the sun is the sun in the sky, and the sun is in God's Son, Jesus Christ. Okay, so to transfer this Christian and Roman pagan thinking to Yule is completely, totally wrong. So the first thing that we're trying to do in historical Old Ways Heathenry is, when were the holidays and what were they about? So we're not going to follow Christianity off a cliff here and say that it's about the birth of the sun being S-O-N, the Son of God, and the sun being S-U-N, because that's not what Yule was about historically. And let's be even more blunt. Judaism has not changed the meaning and the dating of its holy days either in 23 centuries. Passover has always been on the 14th day of Nisan or Aviv for 2,300 years. Judaism is not going to change the dates or the meaning of its holy days. It hasn't for 2,300 years. It's not going to do it in the future. Islam, they're not changing Ramadan. Its dating and its meaning. It's going to still be the same date. It's still going to mean the same thing 1,000 years from now. If heathenry survived until today, its holy days would not have changed. Now, the second thing, because, we're looking at this fourfold point here. Historical Old Ways Heathenry, okay? One, we're going to figure out when the holy days were and what they were about. And we're going to get that right. And then on the holy days, we do Blot and Sumble, which are the two forms of ritual in historical heathenry. So the next 2 points is how Blot was done and how Sumble was done. And now people are going to say, listen, we don't do Blot historically. We don't kill our own food anymore. I lived in New York and New Jersey for part of my life. And, when you're living amongst a lot of Jewish people, you realize that Jewish people have neighborhoods and they have Jewish kosher markets. They have kosher restaurants. And, that's a good thing, because one thing that the Jews are amazing at is they're amazing at keeping their own culture intact. And how are they amazing at doing that? They keep their own cultural traditions, their siddur, their customs. They keep them. That's how they keep their culture intact. Heathenry has lost its culture because it doesn't know what its culture is, so we have to reconstruct it. And we can't reconstruct it like a bunch of yahoos that don't do any research. So how is Blot done historically? What's my point about Jewish kosher restaurants? Well, had heathenry survived until today, we would have heathen butchers. And we go buy meat from them because, my wife, she owns some farmland and, she grew up on a farm. And I don't know what it's like to slaughter an animal. These aren't things, because I didn't grow up on a farm. I don't know how to do this. So, I appreciate what she has in her upbringing, which is different from mine. So if most of us buy our food from Walmart or Albertsons or Jewel or whatever today, we would still, if heathenry survived until today, we'd have a heathen butcher that would keep blood, because the most important part of a Blot is the blood. A lot of people say, oh, we offer animals and whatnot. There are a few passages that imply that, but when you read most of the passages, almost all of them on Blot, you have the creation of sacred space. You have it in Old English, Old Saxon, and all the Scandinavian tribes. All the Germanic tribes created sacred space. They all put blood on altars, stone altars called herger or herds. And, they would slice the artery of the animal. They would drain the blood. The blood would be poured on the altar or the herg. It would be sprinkled on the people. It would be sprinkled on the walls of the wine hall or mead hall. And it would be sprinkled on any statues to the gods and any of the heathen hosts. Blot was a very important part. And while, yes, most of us don't butcher our own meat anymore, had heathenry survived till today, we'd have heathen butchers that would give us the blood from the animals, and we can take the blood and the meat. We can still eat the meat, but really, historically, the sacrifice given on the altars was blood. They kept the hides to keep them warm, and they, used the blood as a part of research or as a part of ritual. Now, the next question is how Sumble was done historically. One of my favorite passages in the historical sources is Hakon the Good, chapters 16, really 15, because it discusses how Yule was moved from the full moon of Yule Manuther to the solstice. But chapter 16 gives us a detailed Yule Blot followed by a Sumble. And even though our ancestors did not have automobiles, they understood that you eat before you drink. They didn't have DUI issues, not because they didn't have automobiles, but because they were smart, because their customs that they learned back then are wisdom for today. And, had heathenry survived until today, Sumble would be done essentially the same way. Catholic masses haven't changed much in 1700 years. I mean, now it's not done in Latin, but the liturgy is the same. If you grew up in a Catholic church and you missed Mass for 20 years, after you've heard it for 10 years, you've heard the same words over and over again, you can go back to a church 20 years later and you'd be able to recite the Mass along with the priest. Maybe not the homily, but all the words are the same because it's overly liturgical. I'm not saying heathenry was that liturgical, but what I am saying is that there were certain things done in historical Sumble that, the ancestors would recognize as being a Sumble. Sumble in Beowulf is not all that different from Sumble in Håkon the Good, chapter 16, or Olaf's Saga Helga, chapter 35, I think it is. There is a Heims Kringla chapter 35. I just don't remember the particular saga off the top of my head. But we have a detailed Sumble where, 3 earls lost their fathers in the same year, and they did a they did a Sumble commemorating their fathers and, ancestor veneration to their fathers. So, if you compare these symbols in the historical sources to each other, whether it's done in Sweden, whether it's done in England, whether it's done in Saxony, it's all very, very similar. So how was Sumble done historically? Well, had heathenry survived until today, we'd still have toasting and boasting of the ancestors. We'd still have stories probably sung, and we'd have heathen music, but it would be with modern instruments. There would probably be less poetry because the modern mind likes to watch television instead of share stories verbally around the fire. So if they did share it verbally and in song, I don't think it would be as poetic as the Eddas were in some of the poems of the past. It would be more like modern storytelling, like narrative. A followed by B followed by C. They tell the story, not make it poetry. It's just my guess, but that's how modern books are written. When we buy a book by Stephen King, it's not poetry, but heathen stories were typically always poetry. So really, the first 3 points on this list: when were the holidays, what are they celebrating, how Blot was done historically, how Sumble was done historically. Had these things survived today, sure, they would have changed a little, but Blot would still be about blood. Sumble, yeah, we'd use modern electricity, and we'd have, our dining rooms would probably be a bit longer, more resembling a long house. And the idea of Sumble would essentially be the same. Yeah, we'd have modern clothing like our heathen ancestors had modern clothing of their day. We'd have modern drinking utensils just as our heathen ancestors had modern drinking utensils of their day. A Catholic Mass is not very different today. The difference is instead of riding a horse there or walking there, you drive your car, park in the parking lot, and walk in the church with modern electricity and whatnot. The same thing is true. Certain things do not change very much. So, and some other tribal viewpoints. I can get into this, but let's just put it this way. The Saxons didn't have the Bifrost. They had the Weg. They had a road between the realms, not a rainbow bridge. They didn't have Valhalla like the Scandinavians had. They had Muspellis. Instead of having Urther and the Nornir, they had Word and the Yeshepu, or Word and the Shapers, to put it in modern English. I mean, I can go on, but point 4 is less important than points 1 through 3 because, we would learn other tribal viewpoints and we learned some differences between the various tribes. But in the end, heathenry was about orthopraxy. And tribal differences, different names for different things, maybe a different god, like the Yinglings, the royal house of Sweden, that traced their descent to Yngvi Freyr. The Saxons did it to Sasno, or the Essex Saxniat. And I probably I'm not very good at Old English, so my apology. The Old English outside of Essex, they always were tracing their descent to Woden, and typically before Woden it was Beldeg, which is Balder. So, there were some differences in tribes, but they had more things in common than they had differences. And really, I can't stress enough, the essence of Old Way Heathenry is points 1 through 4 here. So thank you for watching this video. I have 90 some odd blog articles which quote historical sources in great detail. So come visit my website at www.aldsidu.com. You can see all my blog articles at www.aldsidu.com/blog. Please like and subscribe. And of course, join us on the Facebook page, Saxon Heathenry. Be nice to discuss Old Ways Heathens with those who really want to reconstruct the old ways for our modern world and do the historical religion and not just make up stuff. And again, I'm not saying New Ways Heathens are bad. I think that Old Ways Heathens should not put down New Ways Heathens. New Ways Heathens should not say that their ways, when they don't want to research, are historical ways. They should research and know what they're talking about and be honest with the general public. And honestly, Old Ways Heathens were always going to be a minority in the greater heathen movement. We're going to be a tiny minority because most Christians don't read their Bibles. Just about every heathen I come across does not read the Eddas or the Sagas, and most of them haven't even read any of the Eddas or Sagas. They've read some websites on the World Wide Web for about 5 to 20 minutes and, only know what other people say, and they're not very well educated. So those of us who research the old ways and are trying to reconstruct it, we must remember that we're going to be a tiny minority. And it is time for us to divorce Asatru with respect, and we need to have positive relations with them. But since we don't agree on what the holidays were about and how to celebrate them and when they were celebrated, and we celebrate Blot and Sumble, the two rituals attested in historical sources, because we do those completely differently, the New Ways Heathens aren't going to like us anyways. So, we need to be respectful and kind, but in the end, we need to be two different groups, and we need to accept the fact we're going to be the tiny minority. But hey, thank you so much for watching this video. May the fates be kind.